Okay, so picture this. It's Georgia, right after the Civil War. The fighting's over, but everything is up in the air. The future is just a blank page. For millions of newly freed African Americans, this was a moment of just incredible hope, but also, terrifying uncertainty. Two totally different ideas for what Georgia could become were about to slam into each other. So let's dive in and see how this battle for the soul of post-war Georgia played out.
This was the question, right? The big one. The war was over, but what did freedom actually mean? Was it just not being a slave anymore? Or did it mean you could get a job, get an education, vote, feel safe in your own home? Nobody really agreed on the answer, and the fight to define it would shape America for the next 100 years.
And right away, two organizations jumped into the ring to offer their own very different answers. On one side, you had the Freedmen's Bureau. It stood for a promise of progress, of support. And on the other side, the Ku Klux Klan, which answered with a brutal campaign of terror. These two groups really represent the two possible futures that were fighting it out.
All right, so first, let's look at that engine of hope. This was the organization the federal government created to try and help navigate this brand new world, the Freedmen's Bureau. Its official name was, a bit of a mouthful, the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, but its mission was super clear: create a support system for both African Americans and poor whites who had been completely devastated by the war. And that's key. This wasn't just for one group. It was about trying to help an entire society deal with this massive, massive change. So what were they actually doing on the ground? Well, their work was incredibly practical. I mean, they were handing out food and finding shelter for people who had nothing. But it went way beyond that. They were supervising labor contracts to make sure newly freed people weren't getting exploited, and they even set up courts to handle legal fights. But maybe most importantly, they focused on building things like schools and hospitals. And this part is huge. A lot of people don't know this, but before the Freedmen's Bureau, Georgia didn't have a public school system. Not for anyone, black or white. The Bureau's work actually laid the foundation for the state's entire modern public school system. I mean, what a legacy, right? And one that's so often overlooked. But here's something that might surprise you when you think about who was involved in this big educational push. There's this idea that it was all people from the North coming down to help, but the actual historical records showed that about a fifth of the people working on this were locals. Yup, 20%. Research shows that almost a fifth of the teachers in these new schools were native Georgians, and that includes both black and white Georgians. So this wasn't just some top-down federal project. This was a real grassroots movement, with people on the ground who truly believed in the power of education. But, for every action of progress, there was a violent reaction. And that brings us to the other group that rose from the ashes of the war, the Ku Klux Klan.
The Klan didn't just appear overnight as a full-blown terrorist group. It actually started in 1867 as more of a social club for ex-Confederate soldiers. But it didn't stay that way for long. It got more and more political, and then it turned to terror as its main weapon to get what it really wanted: total social and political control. And here's the crucial thing to understand. Their violence wasn't just random chaos. Oh no, it was highly strategic. They were trying to tear down everything Reconstruction was building. They did that by terrifying black voters and their white Republican allies, trying to stop them from even showing up to vote, let alone run for office. The whole point, the big mission, was to put a system of absolute white supremacy back in place. And their method for doing this was simple and unbelievably brutal: terror. We're talking intimidation, beatings, murder, anything to crush that new spirit of freedom and progress that was just starting to grow. So now you can see the two sides heading for a collision, right? You've got one group dedicated to building new things, new institutions, a new future, and another group dedicated to tearing it all down. It really boils down to this: building versus burning. The Klan looked at everything the Freedmen's Bureau was accomplishing, and they saw it as a massive threat to their whole vision for the South. So their attacks were laser-focused on the symbols and centers of black progress. So the Bureau was helping to build schools where black kids were learning to read and write for the very first time. They were helping to organize churches, which became these incredible centers of community, of hope, of political organizing. These were the actual physical buildings of freedom. And what was the Klan's response? They burned those very schools to the ground. They attacked those churches. They knew that if you want to destroy a people's future, You start by destroying the places where that future is being built. It was a direct, violent, and just devastating answer to the Bureau's work. So, who won? Who won this fight? Well, like a lot of things in history, the answer is complicated. It really shows you how you can have short-term winners and long-term legacies that tell a totally different story. Let's break down how this all shook out.
In the short term, you gotta say, the Klan's terror campaign, it worked. By 1871, Democrats, and a lot of them were Klansmen, had taken back political control of Georgia. But, and this is a big but, the Bureau's legacy refused to die. The schools they started, incredible institutions like Morehouse College and Clark Atlanta University, they're still here today educating new generations of leaders.
So this first version of the Klan was eventually suppressed by the federal government and kind of fizzled out around the same time its political allies got back in power. But the idea behind it, that didn't go anywhere. It just went underground, waiting, until it came roaring back in 1915. And this is maybe the most chilling part of the whole story. While the organization itself faded for a while, its ideology of white supremacy, that's what won the day. It became the normal way of thinking, politically and socially, in Georgia and all across the South. And that led directly to the whole era of Jim Crow and decades of racial segregation.
It leaves us with this really big question, one that goes way beyond Georgia in the 1870s. When there's a real push for progress, and it's met with a violent, hateful backlash, who gets to write the final chapter? Is history defined by the good things we build or by the forces that try to burn them all down? That's definitely something worth thinking about.